The ice on the stone steps was an extension of Audrey's own marrow, a familiar pain that kept her small and silent. Inside the great hall of the Ironwood Pack, firelight promised warmth, a safety she was forbidden to share. She was counting the minutes until the mating ceremony, where Ethan, the future alpha, would choose his political bride, was finally over. But when the heavy oak door creaked open, it was Ethan himself who stepped out, restless and seeking air. His presence was overwhelming, a stark silhouette of power against the freezing sky. He saw only a shadow until his bare hand brushed her exposed, shivering wrist. In that instant, the biting cold of winter was annihilated by a lightning strike of the fated mate bond, a connection so vast and absolute it stole the breath from his lungs and the consciousness from hers. The wind, thick with the scent of pine and sharp-driven snow, had become a partner in her punishment. It whipped around the eaves of the Ironwood Pack's magnificent great hall, mocking the thinness of Audrey's worn cloak. She was not inside, where the firelight promised sanctuary and the air was rich with celebratory spice. She was outside, where the stone steps of the servants' entrance were slick with black ice, and the cold had numbed her fingers into useless claws. For an outcast like Audrey, the temperature was more than a number. It was a societal verdict. It was the chill of the Omega's isolation, the constant low thrum of being unwanted, finally manifesting as a bone-deep ache. She was the shame of a lineage long dissolved, allowed on packlands only as a silent warning to others. This is what happens when the blood runs thin. "Just breathe, Audrey," she whispered, the plume of her own breath instantly turning white and fragile in the air. Her wolf, usually a fierce and protective phantom in her mind, was curled tight and silent, hiding from the world. It was a coping mechanism forged over years of being overlooked, of hearing whispers like ice shards shattering against her name. Her only hope now was to remain perfectly still until morning, blending into the frozen architecture of the building. Inside, the Ironwood Pack was deep into its annual mating ceremony. It was a night of brutal political calculation masquerading as joy, where alliances were forged and the future of the territory was sealed. Tonight, Ethan, the powerful future alpha, would finally choose his Luna. The scent of his own innate strength, cedar and clean mountain air, was occasionally carried on a rogue gust of wind when a servant hurried through the door. Each whiff was a painful reminder of the life she could never touch. She shifted on the freezing granite, trying to ignore the dull, agonizing burn in her toes. She was required to be present on pack ground until the final announcement, a bizarre rule designed more to ensure she witnessed her own exclusion than to include her in any official capacity. She wished she could melt into the shadows, disappear beneath the drifts of snow, and wake up when the world was warm and honest again. A sudden, excited burst of applause from inside, louder than before, signaled the selection was likely happening now, followed by a momentary, tense silence. Suddenly, the scent of cedar intensified, heavy and close. Audrey's wolf stirred, a flicker of nervous energy in the pit of her stomach. She heard the distinct, heavy sound of a hand on the oak door's iron latch, followed by a low, frustrated growl. It wasn't the tentative sound of a servant. It was the decisive movement of an alpha needing space. Ethan was coming out. She pressed herself against the cold stone, praying the deep shadows of the ancient building would swallow her whole. The scraping sound of the latch being thrown stopped the breath in her chest. She squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable discovery. But instead of a chaotic rush, the movement stopped. The air grew still, thick with a tension far colder than the snow. Then, from the barely perceptible crack of the door, a rich, unmistakable scent of cedar and mountain air poured out. It was followed by a sudden, intense draw on her senses, an involuntary response her body had never given before. He was scenting her. He knew she was there. And now, the heavy oak door began to grind slowly inward. Ethan felt the weight of the crown before it was even placed on his head. Inside the great hall, the air was thick, suffocating not just with perfume and pine boughs, but with expectation. Every conversation was a calculation, every toast a declaration of loyalty, and every glance toward Gwendolyn, beautiful, impeccable, and utterly uninspiring, was a knot tightening around his future. He wasn't choosing a mate tonight, he was signing a treaty. "Ethan, dear, you look restless. Are you considering the pairings?" Vivienne's voice, smooth as polished steel, cut through the noise. His mother was magnificent tonight, draped in furs and diamonds, radiating the relentless pride of the Ironwood Pack. She was the architect of his life, and her gaze held no room for dissent. "Just warm, Mother," he replied, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "The fire is too robust." He needed out. He needed the honesty of the night air, the vast silence of the mountain that truly defined his pack's territory. He needed to be free of the cloying sense of ambition and deceit for 5 minutes. He threw the latch on the heavy servant's door with more force than necessary, letting the cold slam into his face as a welcome relief. The thick oak swung inward, and he stepped onto the landing. The sudden drop in temperature was a shock, but the silence was immediate balm to his fraying nerves. He leaned against the stone frame, taking deep, grateful breaths of crisp, unadulterated cold. For a moment, he was just a wolf, not an alpha in waiting, not a political pawn. He stared up at the swirling clouds, listening to the wind scour the mountain peaks. It was in that quiet moment that his senses, finely tuned by generations of alpha blood, snagged on something wrong. He hadn't smelled it inside the hall, but out here, stripped of distracting perfumes, the scent was distinct. It was faint, almost pathetic, but undeniably there. A cold, frightened scent mixed with the metallic tang of something freezing. It was a low blood scent, an anomaly, a wolf far too weak and isolated to be lurking on the immediate perimeter of the hall during the mating ceremony. Who would dare? His annoyance returned, sharper this time. He was meant to be claiming his destiny inside, and instead he was dealing with some rule-breaking scavenger on the steps. "Show yourself," his mind commanded, the alpha voice automatically dropping into a low growl of warning. When there was no response, he pushed off the wall and moved toward the deepest shadow, his powerful body coiling with impatience. He saw a shape then, small and huddled, trying to disappear into the frozen architecture. He reached out, intending to grip the intruder's shoulder, yank them to their feet, and deliver the deserved reprimand. His fingers found the thin, icy fabric of a cloak and slid past it to brush against cold, human skin. The contact wasn't a warning, it was a detonation. A shockwave of heat, raw power, and profound recognition ripped through Ethan, overwhelming his senses. It felt like every nerve ending had been struck by lightning, not just once, but in an endless, echoing chain. The scent of cedar and mountain air met a fragile, pure scent he hadn't known existed, and the two merged, creating a single, blinding euphoria. Mate. His wolf roared the word, savage and possessive, completely overriding his consciousness. He stumbled, gripping the small, shivering shoulder, no longer seeing a shadow, but staring into the face of his absolute, undeniable destiny. The grip of Ethan's hand felt less like skin and more like a brand pressed against her fragile wrist. It wasn't the pain of the cold that consumed Audrey now, but an explosion of heat so instantaneous and brutal it stole the air from her lungs. She gasped, but the sound was trapped in her throat, dissolving into the roar filling her ears. His scent, the clean, commanding cedar she had only ever caught in faint, mocking traces, surged over her, rich and inescapable. It invaded every cell, rewriting her biology in a single catastrophic moment. She felt the sudden, agonizing awakening of her own wolf, the timid, suppressed creature she kept buried deep inside her consciousness, yanking itself free, screaming its recognition. Alpha. Mate. For years, she had been a ghost, a temperatureless shadow, convinced she didn't even have a proper bond to sense. Now, every nerve was alight, vibrating with agonizing, glorious certainty. The world tilted violently. The stone steps dissolved beneath her feet, the cold of her shame forgotten in the face of this absolute fiery claim. Ethan, too, was frozen, his massive frame trembling slightly against the sudden savage force of the connection. His eyes, fixed on her face, were no longer the calm, thoughtful brown of the pack leader. They were molten gold, fierce and utterly disbelieving. He saw the cold, the tattered cloak, the fragile exhaustion, yet his wolf saw only Luna. It was an impossible, maddening contradiction, and the internal struggle was tearing at him. "No," he breathed, the word a ragged sound torn from a place deeper than his chest. It wasn't a denial of the bond, but a denial of the circumstance. Not here, not now, not her. But the bond didn't care for his political schedule or his mother's expectations. It was a gravitational pull, dragging him down into the heat and the immediate, staggering need for this shivering, low-blood wolf. His alpha instincts demanded she be warmed, claimed, and sheltered. His mind, however, was in chaos, remembering the hundreds of expectant faces waiting inside, particularly Vivienne's cold, calculated glare and Gwendolyn's smug anticipation. Audrey felt the force of his shock, the powerful rejection woven into the certainty of his recognition, and it was the final blow. The exhilarating surge of the bond, coupled with the years of emotional suppression, was too much. Her world narrowed to the blazing gold of his eyes, the overpowering scent of cedar, and the unbearable rushing heat. Her body, already weakened by the cold, could not sustain the intensity. Her vision swam. The agony of the forced awakening retreated into a blessed, deafening silence. Her knees buckled, and she began to slide down the icy steps, her hand slipping from his powerful grip. Just before the darkness claimed her, she felt two strong arms snatch her up, pulling her tight against a chest that was now radiating the furnace-like heat of a true alpha. She registered the raw, protective snarl that erupted from Ethan, a sound meant for predators and threats, a sound meant to defend his mate. Then, there was only the cold black comfort of oblivion. Ethan held the unconscious form of Audrey against his chest, her icy skin chilling him even through the layers of his ceremonial attire. The heat of the mate bond raging in his blood was a cruel internal fire, demanding that he press her closer, shield her, claim her, even as his mind screamed a furious denial. She was the Omega, the reject, the one they pretended didn't exist. His training, instilled since birth by his mother, Vivienne, dictated duty above all. Duty meant Gwendolyn, the Beta's daughter, a strong, high-ranking wolf whose alliance secured their borders and political standing. Duty meant stability. This wolf in his arms, shivering and frail, meant chaos, scandal, and potentially a crippling internal war within the Ironwood Pack. He snarled, a low, guttural sound of pure animalistic frustration that had nothing to do with the freezing temperature. The mate bond didn't offer a choice. It offered absolute, undeniable truth. And the truth was, every cell in his body was now irrevocably tied to this small, despised female. Her weakness was intolerable to his alpha spirit. Her coldness was a physical wound he had to heal. "Mate, mate, mate," his wolf chanted, a deafening drumbeat that drowned out every lesson, every protocol, every political obligation. He looked back at the heavy oak door. Inside, they were waiting for him to return and conclude the ceremony, to announce the engagement that would secure his reign. He could deny the bond. He could leave her here, claim she was an intruder, or worse, that she collapsed from the cold, and let the pack doctors deal with her quietly. The bond would hurt, yes, but he could suppress it. Alphas were taught to suppress weaknesses. He lowered his head, his nose brushing her cold, damp hair. Her fragile scent, so clean beneath the icy air, was intoxicating. It was the missing piece he hadn't known he needed, a pure, grounding element that balanced his overwhelming power. For the first time since he accepted the alpha mantle, Ethan felt completely, terrifyingly whole. The realization brought a fresh wave of primal possessive fury. Fury at himself for being blind, fury at the pack for marginalizing his destiny, and blazing fury at the circumstances that forced this choice upon him. He would not hide his Luna in the shadows. He would not leave her to freeze. He shifted his grip, one arm hooking securely under her knees, the other supporting her shoulders. Audrey was limp, but the slight weight of her body felt heavier than the weight of the crown he was meant to inherit. He didn't know what lay ahead, scorn, battle, or a political firestorm, but he knew what he held in his arms was sacred. He would defy them all. He would risk the entire Ironwood Pack for this. With a definitive, earth-shaking resolution, Ethan turned back toward the great hall. His jaw set, his molten gold eyes burning with a declaration of war, he slammed his boot against the door, demanding entry. He was done being the dutiful son. He was the alpha, and his mate was coming inside, whether the pack was ready or not. Ethan kicked the door open with a crash that silenced the entire Ironwood Pack. The heavy oak burst inward, splintering slightly against the jamb, tearing him instantly away from the frigid isolation of the night and thrusting him into the brilliant, suffocating heat of the great hall. The contrast was immediate and jarring. Inside, hundreds of wolves, draped in ceremonial finery, had been moments away from erupting into cheers, but now stood frozen, glasses half raised. The air, thick with the scent of rich mahogany, imported wine, and expectation, suddenly held a core of absolute horrified silence. Ethan didn't notice the stunned faces of his beta or the whispers that followed his entrance like a shockwave. His focus was singular. The core of the hall, where the current leadership sat, utterly exposed by the light. He strode forward with long, decisive paces, his boots thudding on the polished floor. There, on the raised dais, sat Vivienne. The alpha female had been holding a delicate glass of amber liquid, ready to propose the final toast. Her composure was legendary, but even she could not mask the slow, glacial creep of shock across her perfect features. Her eyes, usually shrewd and calculating, widened as they tracked the figure in Ethan's arms. Beside her, Gwendolyn stood rigid. Her silk dress was the color of winter ice, and her carefully curated smile had dissolved into a mask of pure, vicious disbelief. She recognized the tattered cloak immediately. She recognized the shame. She recognized the girl who was always relegated to the dark. Gwendolyn's scent, typically bright with self-assurance, was now tainted by a volatile mix of panic and acid resentment. Ethan reached the foot of the dais, stopping directly before his mother. The firelight reflected in his eyes, turning them into solid chips of furious, possessive gold. He held Audrey, who remained limp and unconscious, her face unnaturally pale against the dark fur of his tunic. The physical display of her fragility, carried in the strong arms of their future alpha, was a stark, undeniable image. "Ethan," Vivienne finally managed, her voice a low, dangerous command that demanded answers but expected obedience. "What is the meaning of this intrusion? Who is that?" Ethan looked down at Audrey, pressing her closer against the demanding roar of his inner wolf. The cold still radiating from her body was the only thing anchoring him to reality. He lifted his gaze back to his mother, his expression uncompromising. The words he spoke were not a question, a plea, or an explanation. They were a declaration that severed all political ties, all pacts of duty, and all pretense of stability. "This is Audrey," he stated, his voice ringing with alpha authority. "And she is my mate. The ceremony is concluded." The collective gasp from the pack was louder than the crack of the door. Gwendolyn let out a choked sound, her hand flying to her mouth. Vivienne, however, simply rose, dropping her glass. It shattered on the marble floor, the sharp sound echoing the sudden, irreparable fracturing of the Ironwood Pack's future. Her face was a terrifying mask of controlled wrath, and every wolf in the hall instinctively lowered their gaze. The ceremony was, indeed, over. A war had just begun. The silence in the great hall was not empty. It was pressurized, thick with 1,000 held breaths and simmering disbelief. Vivienne stood on the dais, motionless save for the slow, measured rise and fall of her chest. The shattered glass near her foot glinted in the firelight, the only visible sign of her immense controlled fury. Every eye was locked on Ethan, who still held Audrey, refusing to yield an inch. Gwendolyn was the first to find her voice, though it was sharp, brittle, and edged with panic. "Ethan, you cannot be serious. This is some kind of sick jest, a cruel display. Remove her from the hall, now. She is an intruder." Ethan's gaze snapped up to his rival. "She is not an intruder, Gwendolyn. She is my mate." His voice held the absolute, unyielding resonance of a true alpha, a sound that made every wolf in the room, even the high-ranking members, instinctively lower their heads. Vivienne finally moved, descending the 2 steps from the dais with chilling grace. She stopped close enough to Ethan that her rich, regal scent of aged parchment and power overwhelmed the cedar. Her eyes were chips of polished ice as they swept over Audrey's face, registering the pale skin, the cheap fabric, and the unmistakable lack of packmark. "The bond is a sacred thing, Ethan. Yes," Vivienne conceded, her tone dangerously calm. "But this is a mistake. A momentary aberration of your senses, brought on by the stress of the ceremony. Her scent is weak, her bloodline is unacceptable. She is not fit to be the Luna of the Ironwood Pack." Ethan tightened his arms around Audrey, a protective gesture that was both fiercely primal and intensely public. "The bond is absolute, Mother. It is not an aberration. And the moon goddess cares nothing for our pack's political calculations. She is mine, and I am hers." The beta, Gwendolyn's father, finally stepped forward, his face etched with concern for both his daughter and the pack's stability. "Alpha Ethan, tradition dictates that the Luna must possess a proven lineage, her mother's history alone." He trailed off, the unspoken disgrace hanging heavy in the air. "Her mother's history is irrelevant," Ethan countered, dismissing the centuries of Ironwood tradition with a single wave of his hand. "My decision is final. You will recognize her as your future Luna." Gwendolyn let out a frustrated cry. "She was found freezing in the snow, Ethan. She's clearly incapable of even maintaining her own body heat. How can she lead us against the North Wolves? This is a curse. You are weakening us for a pathetic, fleeting scent." Ethan looked at Gwendolyn, and the pure scorn in his gaze was lethal. "You will watch your tongue, Gwendolyn. She is not weak. She is recovering from exposure. The only weakness here is the pride that prevents you from bowing to fate." Vivienne laid a cold, restraining hand on Ethan's forearm, her expression darkening into true malice. "You have made your declaration, son, but the Ironwood Pack does not accept its Luna from the frozen dust without proof. Before any mate can be claimed, her worth must be tested. We will not be led by an untested low blood. She will undergo a trial." The word trial echoed through the silent hall, a term known to every wolf as a challenge reserved for traitors or those who had grievously offended pack law. It was an ordeal few survived. It was a death sentence masquerading as a test. Ethan carried Audrey immediately out of the great hall and down a secluded corridor to a small private office used for confidential pack meetings. He laid her gently on a velvet chaise lounge, confirming she was still breathing. A small, shallow mercy. The protective snarl in his chest remained, a constant, low-grade hum of hostility directed at the world that had dared to threaten his mate. He had just turned to summon the pack's most discreet healer when the door swung open, and Vivienne filled the doorway. Her appearance was flawless, but the sheer force of her alpha female rage was palpable. She didn't slam the door. She simply closed it with a soft click, that felt infinitely more terrifying. "You will not call the healers," Vivienne stated, her voice clipped and cold. "Not yet. We have a conversation to conclude, Alpha. You have just jeopardized your entire claim to the Ironwood Pack for a ghost." "She is not a ghost, Mother. She is my mate," Ethan retorted, stepping in front of the chaise lounge, shielding Audrey's unconscious body. "And she is freezing. If she suffers harm, the bond will be irreparable." Vivienne waved a dismissive hand. "The bond is strong. It will survive a little chill. But will our pack survive her? Do you know who she is, Ethan? You only know the scent, but I know the history." Vivienne moved to the mahogany desk, her movements sharp and deliberate. She leaned her palms flat on the wood, fixing him with a gaze that had terrified warriors into submission. Her mother was Alina, a half-blood of no standing, who was permitted to stay only as a gesture of pity by your father. When she produced a female pup, Audrey, and then succumbed to a fever, we allowed the pup to remain, but only in the furthest reaches of the Omega compound. That was the agreement. We buried the shame. Ethan felt a deep, chilling cold that had nothing to do with the night air. Shame? What shame? She was merely low-ranked. Vivienne's lips curled into a sneer. Merely low-ranked? Alina was supposed to accept a minor pack member. Instead, she chose an outsider, a rogue from the southern plains, a male known for instability and a vicious temper. Audrey's blood is tainted, Ethan. She carries the scent of a rogue line, a volatile, unpredictable power that nearly brought a raid down upon our borders 20 years ago. We cannot afford that risk. The revelation struck Ethan like a physical blow. He had been taught that rogue blood was poison, instability made manifest. If Audrey carried that lineage, her position wasn't just low-ranked, it was fundamentally a threat to their sovereignty. "You should have known better than to follow the primal impulse," Vivienne continued, sensing the moment of doubt. "The mate bond is a gift, but sometimes the goddess plays cruel games. You will nullify the claim, or you will subject her to the trial. There is no other path. The trial is the only way to publicly absolve her, or remove the threat completely." Ethan clenched his fists, the roar in his ears intensifying. She hadn't proposed the trial to test her. She proposed it to dispose of her publicly and legally. He looked down at Audrey, her vulnerability a painful counterpoint to the terrifying power his mother had just revealed. If she had rogue blood, her dormant inner wolf might be a hurricane. And if she was exposed to the rigors of the trial, that suppressed power might kill her before the pack even got the chance. "I accept the trial," Ethan finally declared, the words heavy and final. "But you will not touch her until the commencement. She is under my protection, and I will be her trainer. Anything less, and I will claim my title now, and we will face civil war, Mother." Vivienne stared at her son, seeing the alpha he truly was, unyielding, even when cornered. A faint, terrible smile touched her lips. "Very well, my alpha. You have 30 days. Let the lessons begin." Audrey awoke to a searing, internal heat that had nothing to do with fever. It was the residual fire of the bond, a powerful, protective warmth that was gradually healing the wounds of her exposure, yet it felt painfully unfamiliar. She registered the luxurious velvet beneath her cheek, the unfamiliar scent of cedar and expensive musk, and the crushing weight of panic when she remembered the molten gold in Ethan's eyes. She lifted her head, her movements slow and shaky. The room was dark save for a single lamp, and standing over her were two monumental figures, the towering, rigid form of Ethan and the pristine, unyielding presence of Vivienne. The alpha female was holding a heavy scroll sealed with the Ironwood Pack's crimson crest. "You're awake," Vivienne stated, her tone entirely devoid of compassion. "Good. You need to understand the conditions under which you are permitted to live on pack ground." Audrey tried to sit up, but the room spun. The ceremony," she managed, her throat dry and raw. "What did I do?" "You triggered the fated bond," Ethan interjected, his voice deep and stern, though a tremor of protectiveness vibrated beneath the surface. "And I claimed you. You are my mate, Audrey. But the pack does not accept you yet." Vivienne unrolled the scroll, its crisp parchment crackling in the silence. "Since your lineage is tainted by rogue blood, and your history presents a clear threat to our governance and safety, the Council has decreed you must undergo the trial of worth." She paused, letting the severity of the ancient term sink in. "A 30-day crucible designed to prove if your inner wolf is fit to share the Alpha's life, or if it is the volatile poison we suspect." Audrey's breath hitched. She knew of the trial. Every child in the pack did. It was a legend, a dangerous, near-mythical ordeal of physical and spiritual pain meant to break the strongest wills. Ethan moved closer to the chaise, placing his hand reassuringly on her shoulder, though his eyes remained fixed on his mother. "The terms are absolute, Audrey. You will be tested physically, mentally, and spiritually. The pack will observe every movement. If you show weakness, if you falter, or if you attempt to flee, the bond will be severed, and you will be executed for threatening the pack's safety." Vivienne added the final chilling clause. "If you pass, you will be acknowledged as Luna. If you fail, Ethan will be free to select a mate of proven lineage, and your existence will be erased. The trial begins in 30 days. Until then, you will be confined to quarters and trained only by the Alpha." Audrey stared up at the impossible conditions. 30 days to transform from a despised outcast into a Luna capable of surviving the pack's most brutal challenge. The terror was overwhelming, but underneath the fear, the newly awakened wolf inside her, a creature she hadn't known was there, let out a small, defiant snarl. "I accept," Audrey heard herself say, the single word startling both alpha wolves. It wasn't bravery. It was a desperate clutch at the only thread of hope she had ever been given. Ethan's hand tightened on her shoulder, a silent acknowledgement of the war she had just volunteered to fight. He knew the trial was rigged for her failure, but he was committed to seeing her survive. She had 30 days to prepare for death, and he had 30 days to teach her how to fight for her life and for his. The terms of survival had been set, and the countdown had begun. Audrey stood in her new quarters, the irony of the word a bitter taste in her mouth. She was confined to a small, immaculate guest suite adjacent to the Alpha's private wing, a space more opulent than any she had ever dared to dream of. Yet it felt colder than the stone steps she had been sleeping on. She was a prisoner gilded in silver and silk. She walked to the window, the thick glass preventing her from hearing the wind, but not from seeing the vast, sprawling territory of the Ironwood Pack. Down below, she could make out the faint, meandering tracks in the snow leading away from the great hall. The tracks of the wolves who had attended the ceremony, who had witnessed her shame, and who were now scattering with the tale of the disgraced Alpha and his low-blood mate. 30 days. 30 days to become a warrior, a leader, a Luna. 30 days to convince the formidable Vivienne and the venomous Gwendolyn, and the entire pack, that the blood of a rogue wasn't a death sentence. The memory of Vivienne's cold pronouncement, delivered with such confident malice, sent a shiver of terror through her that the fire in the hearth couldn't chase away. Her inner wolf, which had awoken with such a furious, demanding roar when Ethan touched her, now felt like a frightened pup, hiding in the far corner of her mind. She tried to reach it, to feel the comfort of its strength, but found only resistance. The sheer magnitude of the task ahead, surviving the trial of worth, felt like trying to scale the mountain peak outside with her bare hands. What if I fail? The fear was a living thing, clawing at her throat. If she failed, she would die, and Ethan would be left with a fractured pack, forced to choose Gwendolyn or risk civil unrest. His destiny, his powerful future, had been hijacked by her inconvenient presence. She was less a savior and more a complication. A soft knock came at the door, pulling her from her spiral of self-doubt. It was not Ethan, but an elderly beta servant carrying a tray of food, rich stew and fresh bread. The servant avoided her eyes, placing the tray down quickly before backing out. The message was clear. She was still untouchable, a biological hazard being fed under quarantine. Audrey picked up a spoon, but her appetite was gone. She was trapped, but the truth was, she had accepted the trial not for the pack, or even entirely for Ethan, but because the moment his hand hit her wrist, she had felt real for the first time. She had felt a belonging that defied all logic, and she couldn't retreat to the shadows now. The memory of the Alpha's eyes, burning gold with fierce possessive certainty, was the only thing keeping her upright. She set the spoon down. She couldn't eat. She had to train. She needed to know what power her rogue blood truly held. She walked to the center of the room, closing her eyes, and searched deep within for the massive, hungry wolf that had answered Ethan's call. She pushed past the fear and the shame, sinking down into herself, seeking the primal core that might save them both. But when she found it, there was no massive wolf. There was only the faintest spark of energy and an absolute crippling exhaustion. The bond had activated, but the power required to sustain it and to heal her from the cold had drained her reserves entirely. She was empty. She was weaker than she had ever been. And the Alpha was due to arrive for the first lesson at dawn. Ethan arrived precisely at dawn. He was dressed in thick utilitarian leather and wool, smelling of cold air and the intense, focused energy of a wolf ready for work. He carried no weapons, but the air around him crackled with a dangerous authority that made the expensive furniture in Audrey's room seem insignificant. He assessed the room with a swift, dismissive glance, settling his golden eyes finally on Audrey. She stood near the hearth, trying to appear strong, but the lingering exhaustion from the bond's activation and the exposure still clung to her like a shroud. "We don't have time for polite greetings," Ethan stated, his voice flat and businesslike, devoid of the possessive heat from the night before. This was the Alpha, not the mate. "You have 30 days to prove you are worthy of my pack, and more importantly, worthy of survival. I assume you understand the gravity of the trial." "I understand it's designed for me to fail," Audrey replied, the defiance a dry rasp in her throat. A fleeting look of respect crossed his face, quickly masked by sternness. "Then you understand we have no time to waste. We start with the basics. Shift. Now." Audrey's stomach clenched. She hadn't shifted fully since she was a child, and even then, her wolf had been small and tentative. After the shock of the bond, she feared she had nothing left. She tried to search inward, to summon the primal fury needed to overcome the physical barrier. But the mental space where her wolf should have been was empty and cold. I can't," she admitted, the shame instantly making her drop her gaze. "Not yet. I need more time. The cold." Ethan closed the distance between them in 2 powerful strides. He didn't touch her, but his intense presence forced her chin up. His cedar scent filled her lungs, not with comfort, but with demand. "There is no more time, Luna. The only thing keeping you alive is the belief that I can forge you into something powerful enough to withstand my mother's malice. If you are too weak to embrace your wolf, you are already dead." The harsh assessment stung, stripping away the last vestiges of hope. Tears pricked at her eyes, but she fought them back. "You're hiding her," Ethan continued, his voice softening only slightly, becoming persuasive and low. "Your wolf has been taught to be silent, to be ignored. I felt her when the bond hit, Audrey. She is there, and she is furious. She is screaming at me to protect her. Now, I need you to show me that she can fight for herself." He moved behind her, placing his hands lightly on her shoulders, just at the junction of her neck. His touch sent a current of charged heat through her, a stark contrast to the external cold. The mate bond, suppressed for the moment, thrummed between them, confusing the lesson with pure, unacknowledged desire. Lean into the scent of me, Audrey, he commanded softly, his breath a warm whisper near her ear. Don't fight the heat. Let the power of the bond break the cage they built around her. Show me the wolf I claimed. Following his instruction, Audrey inhaled deeply, allowing the potent, authoritative scent of the alpha to flood her system. The external world, the room, the trial, Vivienne, faded away. There was only Ethan's raw presence and the furious pounding certainty of the mate bond. She channeled the agony of her years spent outside, the humiliation, the sheer crushing solitude, and focused it on the thrumming power radiating from his hands. With a wrenching, painful snap, the shift began. Her bones groaned and cracked, her skin stretched painfully, and a deep, guttural sound, part triumph, part anguish, tore from her throat as she gave herself over to the transformation. She felt the sudden, glorious expansion of her chest and the fierce, predatory weight of 4 paws landing solidly on the rug. She was no longer Audrey, the low-blood outcast. She was a wolf. And as the painful transformation settled, she stood, massive and shaking, her fur a deep, striking silver color that was entirely unexpected, even for Ethan. He had not anticipated silver. He had anticipated dark, low-blood coloring. Silver meant a rarity, a hidden power. Ethan stared, his eyes widening in pure, devastating shock at the silver wolf that now stood before him. This wasn't a pathetic scavenger. This was something ancient. He whispered, the sound thick with wonder and dread. He slowly raised a hand, not in command, but in bewildered awe. What are you? Gwendolyn wasn't used to losing, and she certainly wasn't used to waiting. While Audrey was confined and training, Gwendolyn was busy waging a cold war, making sure the entire Ironwood Pack understood exactly how disgraced their alpha-in-waiting was. She was meticulous, elegant, and utterly venomous. Her first act of sabotage was subtle. She had requested a meeting with the head cook, a kind, older female named Bess, under the guise of discussing the menu for the post-trial celebration. Such a shame about the poor girl's health. Gwendolyn sighed dramatically to Bess, holding a delicate cup of steaming tea. Alpha Ethan is so stressed about the trial of worth. He insists she must be at peak strength, but you know how delicate low-blood constitutions are. He specifically asked that the protein content in her meals be reduced. He fears her stomach can't handle true alpha portions. Bess, worried about the alpha's stress and trusting Gwendolyn's high rank, immediately began diluting Audrey's portions, replacing dense meats and vital oils with thinner broths and soft digestible grains. Audrey felt the effects immediately. The meager food, intended to sustain a smaller wolf, was useless against the crushing energy demands of the mate bond, and the brutal physical training Ethan subjected her to. During their 3rd lesson, while attempting a simple running drill, her legs gave out entirely. Ethan caught her before she hit the ground, his face dark with frustration. You are collapsing too easily, Audrey. Your wolf is strong. I felt the silver, but you have no reserves. What are you eating? Audrey described the light broths and weak stews. Ethan's eyes, already tense, narrowed with sudden, calculating realization. He knew his mother, Vivienne, would resort to political maneuvering, but Gwendolyn's involvement, using the very pack resources meant to sustain them, was a dangerous sign of her desperation. The food is sabotaged, Ethan stated, his voice a lethal whisper. Gwendolyn is trying to starve the strength out of you before the trial even begins. She's testing the loyalty of the pack, twisting my supposed command to make you appear frail. That night, Audrey understood the nature of the fight was changing. It wasn't just a physical test. It was a psychological battle against an opponent who moved in velvet gloves and poisoned food. She was fighting the political tide of the Ironwood Pack, and it was suffocating. She lay in her confined quarters, the hunger a dull ache in her stomach. Her wolf was silent again, but this time, the silence felt less like resignation and more like focused stillness. When the servant returned with the thin morning meal, Audrey didn't touch it. Instead, she asked for extra kindling for the hearth. After the servant left, she approached the heavy, locked door of her room. She focused on the lock mechanism, remembering the brief, agonizing moment of finding her silver wolf, the fury and power that had erupted from her deepest core. She wasn't strong enough to break the door, but maybe she was strong enough to break the lock. She closed her eyes and pushed, not with her arms, but with the latent energy of the silver wolf. It felt like forcing a lightning bolt through a thin wire. A white-hot agony flared in her fingertips, followed by a faint, high-pitched ping. When she opened her eyes, the simple latch of the lock was fractured, the metal warped and useless. She still had the trial to face, but she was no longer a gilded prisoner. She had broken free of the viper's nest, and she could finally leave her luxurious cage to seek the nourishment she needed. Ethan led Audrey deep into the Ironwood Pack's training grounds, a clearing hidden by ancient pines, far from the prying eyes and poisoned food of the Great Hall. After the discovery of her lock-breaking power, Ethan had personally overseen her meals, but the true challenge was integrating the shocking rare power of her silver wolf with her fragile human consciousness. "You shattered the lock with pure energy, Audrey," Ethan stated, pacing before her. "It wasn't brute force. It was latent magic, the kind of power that makes the Ironwood Pack fear rogue blood. If you can't control it, it will burn you out long before the trial starts." Audrey, now fueled by proper food, felt stronger, but terrified of her own core. "I don't know how to call her without being angry or desperate. She only comes out when I'm cornered." "Then we corner you," Ethan said, his molten gold eyes locking onto hers. He stepped closer, crowding her, his massive alpha presence demanding submission. The air immediately thickened with the potent scent of cedar, overwhelming her senses and activating the thrum of the mate bond. "Forget the world. Forget the trial. Forget me," he commanded, his voice dropping to a low, seductive resonance that was half alpha, half mate. "Focus on the fury of the bond. I know how much they hurt you. I felt your years of cold. That is your energy source. Let the rage at your treatment fuel your power." Audrey's breath hitched. She hated being vulnerable, and Ethan was forcing her to expose the deepest, darkest wounds of her isolation. He was asking her to weaponize her pain. She focused on the memory of the freezing steps, the whispers, the constant humiliation. She channeled the betrayal from Gwendolyn's food sabotage. With a powerful surge of mental energy, she slammed into her inner self. This time, the wolf was ready. She didn't shift immediately. Instead, a shimmering, incandescent silver light, a raw manifestation of her magical energy, erupted from her skin, cloaking her like an aura. It pulsed, hot and unstable, making the surrounding pine needles crackle and smoke. The silver wolf was not just a creature of muscle and bone, it was a vessel for primal, volatile power. Ethan watched, awestruck but cautious. "Hold it, Audrey. Keep it tethered to your hands. Use it to form a shield." Audrey tried to obey, pushing the energy outward, attempting to solidify the light. But the power was too raw, too undisciplined. Instead of a shield, a violent wave of silver energy exploded outward, tearing up the earth and snapping the low-hanging branches of a nearby spruce tree. Ethan reacted instantly. With a guttural snarl of concern, he slammed his full alpha power down, wrapping his own energy, dark and restraining, around her volatile silver core. He grabbed her wrists, forcing her to focus on the physical touch, on the undeniable connection between them. "Control it. Anchor it to me," he growled, the intensity of the bond forcing them chest to chest. The contact was devastating. The silver energy subsided immediately, channeled and consumed by the overwhelming force of his bond. Audrey collapsed, panting, her transformation arrested. Ethan held her trembling body close, his face etched with a mixture of relief and fear. Your wolf is magnificent, Audrey, but she is a wildfire. If you can't master that external energy, you'll be a liability in the trial. You need to learn how to keep the fire contained, or Vivienne will use it to prove you're a danger. He realized then the terrifying truth. Audrey's survival didn't hinge on becoming strong enough to fight, but on becoming disciplined enough to hide how strong she truly was. The training session had ended with Audrey exhausted, but physically whole. Back in her luxurious yet confining quarters, the emotional residue of their close physical contact still clung to the air. The raw heat of the bond was always present, but tonight, it was tempered by a fragile, tentative curiosity between them. Ethan sat opposite her, not on the chaise, but in a stiff, uncomfortable wooden chair, as if reminding himself of his duty and separation. He had brought her fresh tea, a gesture of defiance against Gwendolyn's sabotage that Audrey appreciated more than a dozen compliments. "You asked me in Chapter 11 why I was going to choose Gwendolyn," Ethan began, staring into the steam rising from his cup. He didn't look at Audrey, which made the vulnerability in his voice all the more noticeable. It wasn't a choice of the heart, or even the scent. It was a calculus of survival. Audrey hugged her knees to her chest, listening intently. The Alpha's life was such a distant mystery to her, steeped in privilege and power she couldn't comprehend. "The Ironwood Pack is built on stability," he continued, finally lifting his gaze to meet hers. His eyes were soft brown now, not the terrifying gold of his wolf. "We border the North Wolves, a volatile, aggressive territory. The Beta's family, Gwendolyn's family, commands our strongest border patrols. To secure the Alpha line and ensure an unshakable defense, the marriage was necessary. It was a merging of political and military strength." He sighed, running a massive hand through his dark hair. "It was the one thing Vivienne demanded of me. It was my duty. I was raised to prioritize the pack's survival over my own happiness, or even my own bond. I accepted that I would have a loveless marriage, but a powerful reign." Audrey felt a strange mix of pity and relief. The realization that she had shattered a pragmatic, years-long plan, and not a relationship of genuine affection, settled a painful ache in her chest. "So you would have married her, knowing she wasn't your mate?" "Yes," Ethan admitted, the single word heavy with sacrifice. The bond, for some high-ranking alphas, is a luxury, not a necessity. We learn to suppress the deeper pull for the greater good. I had resigned myself to a life without true fire. Then I walked out into the cold and found you. He set his teacup down with a sharp clink. When the bond hit, it wasn't just a mating call. It was a reckoning. It exposed my failure to live honestly. You, the least likely candidate, became my greatest truth. You made every political calculation seem pointless. Audrey's heart swelled at his confession, even as she recognized the immensity of the burden he now carried. You gave up your stable future for me, for a wolf you never met, who carries rogue blood and who can barely shift. I gave up stability for fate, Audrey, Ethan corrected, his voice firming with alpha command. And you do more than barely shift. You possess a volatile silver power that terrifies this pack because they cannot name it. You are not weak. You are a threat to their outdated rules, and that makes you the strongest Luna I could ask for. He stood, the conversation concluded, the warmth dissolving back into duty. You are the chaos I need, Audrey. But if we don't control that chaos, it will kill us both. Rest. Tomorrow we focus on anchoring that silver fire. The trial is drawing closer. 2 weeks into the grueling training, Audrey was starting to feel less like a fragile human and more like a coiled wire. Ethan's relentless regimen, combining endurance runs with aggressive close-quarters combat drills, was breaking her body down, only for the mate bond to surge and knit her back together, leaving her stronger, if perpetually exhausted. Her greatest challenge remained her silver wolf power. The raw energy was difficult to access without the trigger of overwhelming panic or fury, and when it did erupt, it was a liability. Ethan decided they needed a high-pressure scenario. He led her to the base of Widow's Peak, the steepest, most treacherous slope on the Ironwood Pack's territory, known for its unstable rock faces and deadly ice patches. "We are running a simulation of the second trial phase," Ethan explained, his gaze sharp. "You will scale this peak in your human form. If you slip, I will catch you, but I will not rescue you. If you feel panic, you must channel it into stability, not destruction." Audrey looked up at the sheer granite face, slick with runoff. "I'll shift and climb," she argued, already feeling the fear tighten her chest. "No, shifting is too obvious. You must learn to summon the silver power in human form. Scale it, Audrey. Use your will to find your hidden strength." She began the ascent, the icy rock instantly tearing at her fingertips. The pressure was immense. She could hear Ethan climbing silently just below her, a massive, reassuring anchor. But she knew his presence was only a test. Halfway up, her footing gave way on a patch of black ice. Audrey screamed, the sound instantly stolen by the wind, and began a terrifying slide downward. She groped wildly for purchase, her heart hammering against her ribs, panic flooding her consciousness. "This is it. I'll fall. I'll break. I'll fail the trial in Ethan." In that instant of absolute dread, the silver wolf roared to life, not as a destructive burst of energy, but as a pure instinctual force. Instead of erupting outward, the energy solidified inward. She felt a tremendous immediate density spread through her bones and muscles. Her weight, which was light and agile seconds before, became immense, locking her into the rock face. Her fingers, which had been slipping, suddenly gripped the granite like iron clamps. The silver light didn't escape her skin. It was contained entirely within her body, momentarily giving her superhuman density and grip strength. Ethan reached her, his expression a mixture of relief and disbelief. "What was that?" "Your weight. You felt like solid stone." Audrey pulled herself onto a narrow ledge, panting, the intense density draining away slowly. Her fingers were bruised but unbroken. "I don't know," she whispered, shaking. "It wasn't a blast. It felt like becoming incredibly heavy. Like gravity suddenly multiplied just for me." Ethan stared at her, a profound realization dawning on his face. "Rogue blood," he murmured, "but not chaos. It's earth magic. Your strength isn't in explosive bursts, it's in anchoring yourself. You can become immovable. You can resist force, not just exert it." He looked at the formidable peak above them, then back at Audrey, whose eyes now held a fragile, dawning confidence. "This is your hidden strength, Audrey. The ability to anchor yourself against any physical or emotional storm. Vivienne fears your chaos, but you are actually the most stable force in this pack. You are the immovable object." A wave of intense possessiveness surged through Ethan, no longer just a mate bond, but a profound alpha pride. He realized this power could be the key to surviving the political machinations of his mother and Gwendolyn. With that kind of anchoring ability, Audrey could withstand anything the pack threw at her. They resumed the climb. But now, Audrey was not climbing to survive. She was climbing to claim her destiny. Vivienne did not need to see the training to know what was happening. Her network within the Ironwood Pack was vast, fueled by loyalty, fear, and a shared contempt for the rogue blood that Ethan had brought into the hall. Reports filtered back to her, reports of a silver wolf, reports of shattered wood and unnaturally heavy footsteps, and most alarmingly, reports of a dangerous, possessive heat radiating from her son whenever he was near Audrey. She called an emergency session of the Elders' Council, a gathering designed not to judge Audrey, but to exert pressure on Ethan. The beta reports that the girl has found a strange, non-traditional strength, Vivienne announced, addressing the solemn circle of aged wolves. She spoke calmly, but her scent was the acrid perfume of dominance. She may possess an uncontrolled magical element that is foreign to the Ironwood lineage, If she passes the trial and becomes Luna, she contaminates our bloodline and potentially invites instability that will be our end. Gwendolyn was present, sitting beside her father. She seized the opportunity, her voice sharp with feigned concern. It is not just blood, alpha female. Ethan's bond with her is already compromising his judgment. He protects her weakness. If she is truly unstable, the alpha must be capable of ending the threat himself. The terms of the trial must be absolute. Vivienne nodded, her gaze fixed on the parchment that outlined the original trial. Agreed. The challenges as currently written are insufficient to test an unknown magical factor. We must ensure the final phase is irreversible and conclusive. We must remove the possibility of a political compromise if she survives. With the Council's reluctant agreement, Vivienne rewrote the final phase of the Trial of Worth, replacing a simple test of navigation with a deadly gauntlet, the rite of the unseen ledge. It was an ancient challenge that required the candidate to traverse a crumbling, blind path along the highest, most exposed cliff face of the territory, unprotected and entirely reliant on inner strength. The fall was fatal. Later that evening, Ethan found the revised terms waiting for him on his desk. He read the details of the unseen ledge, his face hardening into a mask of cold fury. He stormed into his mother's private study, the door rattling on its hinges. This is murder, Mother. The rite of the unseen ledge has been outlawed for 2 centuries. You are guaranteeing her death even if she masters her shift. Vivienne didn't flinch. She was examining a rare piece of amber, holding it up to the lamplight. She is a low blood with rogue magic, Ethan. The Ironwood Pack only respects a Luna who has faced death and emerged victorious. The trial must be worthy of the risk you are forcing upon us. If her power is true, she will anchor herself to the rock and survive. If it is only a fleeting anomaly, she will fall. She looked up, her expression utterly devoid of maternal warmth. It also makes your choice easier, son. Should she falter, the pack will see it as fate, not as my malice. You will be free to marry Gwendolyn and stabilize the pack before the month is out. I am protecting your reign, Ethan. Don't confuse duty with hatred. Ethan knew she hated Audrey, but he also recognized the political genius in her move. The challenge was public, ancient, and undeniable. There was no recourse. He had 30 days to teach Audrey how to harness her silver wolf's anchoring power to defy gravity itself, or he would be watching his mate fall from the highest point in the territory. He spun on his heel, leaving the study. He had lost the political battle, but the war for Audrey's life had just escalated into a physical impossibility. He had to tell her about the unseen ledge, and they only had 2 weeks left to prepare for a fatal fall. Ethan had pushed Audrey far past her limits, forcing her to sustain her internal silver anchoring power while navigating difficult, uneven terrain. They were training late, deep in the heavy woods, replicating the conditions of the final rite of the unseen ledge challenge. Ethan didn't want her to rely on sight. He wanted her to rely on the immovable connection to the earth, the core strength of her rogue blood. Focus, Audrey. You are still too light. Ethan growled, his voice strained. He stood a few feet away, observing as she balanced on a slick, moss-covered log suspended over a ravine. You must be heavy, slow, and certain. Imagine Vivienne's face when she realizes you cannot be moved. Audrey focused on the image, the fury spiking the silver energy in her chest. She channeled the rage inward, feeling the satisfying dense gravity settle over her body. She took a slow, heavy step across the log, her footing unnaturally secure. It was in that moment of intense concentration that the first scent hit them, raw, uncontrolled, and hostile. It wasn't the clean pine and crisp snow of the Ironwood Pack. It was stale blood, dust, and unchecked aggression. Ethan froze, every muscle in his body instantly locking down. Rogues! Get down, Audrey! 2 large dark wolves, leaner and far more feral than any pack wolf, burst from the tree line. Their eyes were vacant, their movements desperate and erratic. They were hungry, reckless, and entirely too close to the Alpha's private training grounds. Ethan didn't hesitate. He shifted in a flash of bone and sinew, transforming into a massive, imposing alpha wolf. Pure black fur, muscles rippling under his hide, his teeth bared in a silent, lethal snarl. He met the lead rogue with a brutal slam, the collision echoing like a falling tree. Audrey scrambled off the log and immediately shifted herself. Her silver wolf was sleek, agile, and noticeably smaller than Ethan's alpha form, but the raw power radiating from her fur was undeniable. The second rogue, seeing the alpha engaged, lunged for her, aiming for her throat. Instinct took over. Audrey didn't try to evade. She anchored. As the rogue wolf barreled into her side, she drove the silver power inward, increasing her mass tenfold. Instead of being knocked aside, she became an instant, immovable obstacle. The rogue hit her and bounced off with a pained yelp, momentarily stunned by the sudden resistance. "Anchor, Audrey, don't move!" Ethan roared, tearing away from his own opponent long enough to deliver a command. She stood her ground, using her position to draw the second rogue away from the immediate fight. The rogue circled, confused and hesitant, unable to reconcile the size of the silver wolf with the unexpected hardness of the impact. The fight was fast, brutal, and coordinated by instinct alone. Ethan took down his rogue with a swift, crushing bite to the shoulder. He glanced at Audrey, who was still managing to keep her opponent at bay, leveraging her anchoring ability to absorb the rogue's attacks and keep him frustrated. "Now, strike," Ethan commanded. Audrey felt the alpha's voice pierce the chaos, igniting the aggressive core of her silver wolf. She released the anchoring power and shifted the energy to her muscles, springing forward with a sudden burst of speed. She snapped at the rogue's flank, a non-lethal, punishing strike that sent the dark wolf scrambling backward in terror. The two rogues, battered and realizing they had stumbled into a pair of impossibly powerful wolves, retreated quickly into the shadows. Ethan shifted back, chest heaving, his human form covered in grime and adrenaline. He looked at Audrey, who was still in her stunning silver form, her eyes wide with shock and triumph. "You are not a low blood, Audrey," he breathed, pride overriding the exhaustion. "You are not a liability. You are my perfect opposite, the lightning to my thunder, the unmovable foundation. When we fight together, we are unstoppable." He stepped toward her, and this time, there was no command, only pure, untainted mate connection. He extended his hand, and Audrey, still a silver wolf, nudged her large head gently against his palm, the silent moment of shared victory and desperate hope, cementing the bond between the future alpha and his formidable outcast Luna. The attack had achieved what weeks of controlled training could not. It proved to them both that their combined power was the only thing that could save the Ironwood Pack from itself. The air in the clearing was dense, heavy not with snow, but with the suffocating presence of hundreds of silent, judging wolves. The trial clearing was marked by a circle of ancient, moss-covered stones, and in the center sat a huge, rough slab of granite, the Stone of Reckoning. Audrey stood before the assembled Ironwood Pack, stripped down to thin leather training clothes. She had slept little, her exhaustion warring with the internal hum of her silver wolf. She could feel the crushing weight of their contempt, amplified by the focused malice of Vivienne, who presided from a high seat, her face emotionless and severe. Ethan stood at the perimeter of the circle, his stance rigid, his eyes blazing gold with anxiety and defiance. He was forbidden from intervening, but his mate bond pulsed across the space, a lifeline of pure, frantic heat that Audrey clung to. She met his gaze, and in that silent communication, she drew on the one strength he had taught her, anchoring. The beta stepped forward, his voice booming across the hush. The first challenge of the trial of worth, the test of endurance, the candidate must place her palms upon the Stone of Reckoning and withstand the force of the pack's will. She may not break contact, she may not cry out, she may not fall. Success is measured by surviving the full duration. Audrey stepped toward the stone. It was cold, jagged, and somehow sentient, radiating a low, unpleasant buzz. She placed her hands flat upon its surface, and the silence intensified. Vivienne rose, making a sharp, demanding gesture toward the Elder Council. The elders, powerful wolves themselves, focused their intent on Audrey. It wasn't a physical attack, but a focused, crushing psychic force, the combined, concentrated will of the entire pack, designed to overwhelm her mind and collapse her body. The pain was instantaneous and absolute. It felt like every cell in her body was being simultaneously squeezed and pulled apart. The pressure sought out her deepest insecurities. You are weak. You are low blood. You are poison. Her knees buckled immediately, and a strangled cry almost escaped her throat. But before the sound could surface, she slammed down on her hidden strength. She stopped the psychic attack from spreading by using her unique earth magic. She drove the silver power inward, focusing every ounce of her will on becoming immovable. She was not a yielding flower. She was the bedrock beneath the pack's territory. Audrey's body shook violently, sweat beading instantly on her forehead, but her feet rooted to the earth and her hands remained flat on the stone. Gwendolyn, watching from the front row, smirked, certain the outcast would collapse. Vivienne watched the silent struggle, her eyes narrowing at the unexpected resistance. The low blood should have crumpled already. She intensified the pressure, pouring her own alpha female will into the stone, adding the crushing weight of Vivienne's personal contempt. The agony became blinding, a pure electrical current that threatened to fry Audrey's consciousness. She focused on the silver light, on Ethan's burning eyes, and refused to move. The trial had begun, and her survival depended on her ability to withstand not a physical blow, but the collective hatred of the Ironwood Pack. The first test, the endurance of the stone, was complete. Audrey was hauled off the stone of reckoning, her body trembling violently, her skin covered in a cold sheen of sweat, but her contact remained unbroken. The pack murmurs shifted from contempt to grudging surprise. The second challenge, the test of spirit, began almost immediately. This was a psychological gauntlet. Audrey was placed in the center of the clearing, and the elders began projecting images and painful memories directly into her mind via a controlled mental link. Unlike the first test, which was meant to crush her physically, this was designed to shatter her will and force a public, hysterical breakdown. The memories struck Audrey like waves of ice water. The bitter cold of the steps, the servant avoiding her gaze, the low-blood taunts she'd endured in the schoolyard, the constant, consuming feeling of being utterly alone. The projected memories magnified her isolation, whispering directly into her consciousness. You are nothing. No one wants you. You will always be outside. Audrey stumbled, clutching her head. The pain of reliving the worst parts of her life was overwhelming. She could survive physical exhaustion, but the spiritual wound of her rejection felt fatal. She wavered, the silver energy within her core flickering dangerously close to shutting down. From the sidelines, Gwendolyn saw her chance. This was the moment for the fatal psychological blow. She stepped forward, ignoring the alpha code that demanded silence during the spiritual trial, and projected a sharp, malicious thought toward Audrey. If you die, Ethan can still be saved. Just let go, Outcast. Do the Ironwood Pack a service and be forgotten. The interference, however, had the opposite effect. Gwendolyn's malice, a concrete, defined threat, gave Audrey a target. It was no longer the vague, crushing weight of old rejection. It was the sharp, immediate fury of new injustice. Audrey stopped fighting the painful memories. She allowed the anguish of her isolation to flood her. But instead of succumbing, she channeled it into the unyielding foundation of her silver wolf. She used the anchoring power not to block the memories, but to stabilize herself through them. The loneliness had made her weak, but it had also made her resilient. She lifted her head, her eyes blazing with a fierce, quiet certainty. The projected image of her shivering on the steps did not disappear, But Audrey stared at it, no longer with shame, but with defiance. "I survived this. You cannot break what is already unbreakable." The spiritual attack broke against her newfound resolve, the waves of projected pain dissipating like steam. The elders, tired and shocked, broke the mental link. Gwendolyn, realizing she had accidentally helped Audrey, stepped back, her face white with suppressed rage. Vivienne stood up, a deep, unsettling suspicion in her eyes. The low blood should have been weeping, confessing her worthlessness. Instead, she looked like a survivor. "She passed," Vivienne stated, her voice tight with displeasure. "But these are the easy parts. Prepare the candidate for the final trial. The wilderness awaits." She looked at the Beta's daughter. "Gwendolyn, you are excused. Your interference was disrespectful to the process." Gwendolyn met Vivienne's gaze, but rather than showing remorse, she gave a thin, hard smile. The trial was far from over. Audrey was now moving to the wilderness, where accidents were far easier to arrange and the oversight was minimal. The final stage of the trial, the rite of the unseen ledge, had been framed as a navigational challenge. Audrey was given a map, a crude, centuries-old sketch of the mountainside, and tasked with reaching the highest, most dangerous pinnacle of Widow's Peak. The path was unmarked, unstable, and covered in fresh snow designed to conceal the crumbling ledges. As she entered the treacherous woods, Ethan and Vivienne stood together at the boundary line, watching her retreat. Ethan's jaw was clenched. He knew this was a death trap, and he felt every treacherous footstep Audrey took through their mate bond. "She moves with confidence," Vivienne observed, her voice chillingly neutral. "Your training appears sufficient for mere walking." But Vivienne's focus was elsewhere. Just moments before Audrey started, Gwendolyn had slipped away from the assembly, claiming she needed to speak with her father. In reality, she was taking a shortcut through the lower ravines, reaching a hidden section of the trail well ahead of Audrey. Gwendolyn knew Audrey's unique power, the anchoring, would make her immune to simple pushes or slips. Gwendolyn's solution was both cruel and absolute. She found a deep crevice in the earth, barely visible beneath a layer of fresh powder. Using a heavy, frozen log concealed nearby, she wedged it precariously over the crevice, just at the narrowest point of the path. She then smeared the log with potent, concentrated nightshade oil, a paralyzing neurotoxin that wouldn't kill quickly, but would utterly suppress a wolf's ability to shift or access their latent power. Audrey, relying on the primal certainty of her senses, found the path Gwendolyn had chosen. She stepped onto the log, trusting her footing. The moment her weight settled, Gwendolyn's trap sprung. The log snapped, sending Audrey plunging down into the concealed crevice. She hit the bottom hard, a sickening crack of bone and a flash of blinding white pain, followed by the immediate, metallic taste of blood. The rogue blood had given her anchoring power, but the shock of the fall and the concentrated nightshade oil, which had instantly seeped into her wounds, overwhelmed her system. The oil attacked the core of her inner wolf, silencing the silver fire and preventing her from healing or shifting. She tried to move, to call her wolf, but her limbs were heavy, useless burdens. She was paralyzed, freezing, and bleeding out in a deep, hidden fissure. Gwendolyn, watching from above, smiled with vicious satisfaction. She was now free to walk away, letting the snow cover the crevice and the oil slowly do its deadly work. Audrey was off course, gravely injured, and stripped of the power that might have saved her. She was now nothing more than a lost, helpless human. Audrey felt the terrifying numbness creeping up her legs, battling the darkness that threatened to claim her. Her last conscious thought was the distant, frantic surge of Ethan's panic through the mate bond, a silent scream of absolute terror as he realized, too late, that something fatal had happened to his Luna. The cold in the crevice was absolute, but the paralysis delivered by the nightshade oil was far more terrifying. Audrey was trapped between the crushing pain of her broken leg and the lethal numbness spreading through her core. Her silver wolf, the foundation of her newfound strength, was a silent, suffocated entity, unable to shift, unable to heal. This is it. The chilling whisper of her past rejection returned, magnified by the poison. You failed the trial. You were never strong enough. Now you will die alone, just as you always should have. She fought the darkness, not with power, but with sheer, desperate willpower. She remembered Ethan's face, not the alpha, but the mate, the one who looked at her with pure truth. She remembered the fire of the mate bond, the only warmth she had ever truly known. She would not let the meticulously cruel plan of Gwendolyn destroy the future Ethan had sacrificed everything to claim. The memory of the bond became her anchor. Since she couldn't channel the silver power outward to heal, she forced her consciousness to channel the very will of the bond inward. It wasn't magic. It was pure, painful synergy. She used the distant, frantic distress she felt from Ethan, his silent plea for her to live, and weaponized it. Slowly, agonizingly, she focused every fiber of her being on resisting the paralysis. She fought the venom cell by cell, dedicating the energy of the bond to the single impossible task of commanding her big toe to move. Hours passed. The sun disappeared, and the temperature dropped to lethal levels. Finally, with a wrenching spasm of agony that nearly made her black out, her toe twitched. It was a minuscule victory, but it was enough. The paralysis had begun to break. With the ability to move even slightly, her primal wolf instincts, the inherent resilience of her rogue blood, took over. She was too injured to shift, but she began dragging her paralyzed, broken body out of the crevice. She used her teeth to grip the icy edge of the fissure and hauled herself onto the treacherous, snow-covered path. She was gravely wounded, bleeding, and now fully exposed to the wilderness, far off course. But she was free of the trap. The next hours were a nightmare of crawling, relying on the mate bond to give her direction. She was hunting for the peak, guided not by the map, but by the gravitational pull of her destiny. Every inch was excruciating, but the knowledge that Gwendolyn had tried to murder her sparked a cold, relentless fury. This was no longer a trial of worth. It was a crusade for justice. Just as the moon crested the peak, painting the wilderness in cold silver light, Audrey saw it. The first markers of the right of the unseen ledge. She was back on the course, but she was nearly dead. She looked down at her shredded hands, then up at the dark, impossible outline of the cliff face ahead. She had survived the paralysis, but now she faced Vivienne's ultimate challenge, the crumbling, blind path along the highest precipice. She managed a weak, feral snarl. Gwendolyn had taken her strength. Vivienne had taken her path. But she still had her will. And she was going to finish the trial. Hours had crawled by since Audrey disappeared into the deadly final phase of the trial. At the base of Widow's Peak, the atmosphere was strained past bearing. The beta was nervously consulting his timepiece, and Gwendolyn stood with a predatory calm, exchanging knowing glances with Vivienne. Audrey was long overdue. By the rules of the trial, she was presumed lost, dead, or disqualified. Vivienne finally broke the silence, her voice ringing with the finality of a judge. The time allotted for the ascent is long expired. The candidate has failed to present herself on the summit. The trial of worth is concluded. The low blood has proven incapable of survival, validating the pack's caution. Ethan, you are now— She has not failed, Ethan interjected, his voice cutting across the clearing like a thunderclap. His eyes were pure, molten gold, fixed not on his mother, but on the treacherous path Audrey had taken. He felt the mate bond. It was faint, ragged and terrified, but undeniably active, leading him far off the designated route. Ethan ignored the gasps of the pack and took 3 steps, his powerful body radiating alpha power. He shifted in a seamless, explosive transition, becoming the massive black wolf that symbolized the Ironwood lineage. He vanished into the woods, driven by the furious, desperate pull of the bond. He followed the faint psychic trail of agony and resistance, finding the hidden crevice and the remnants of Gwendolyn's trap. He sniffed the frozen, broken log, the potent, bitter scent of nightshade oil immediately identifying the poison. This was no accident. This was a direct criminal attempt on the Luna's life, a violation of pack law and the sacred neutrality of the trial. He shifted back, his face a chilling mask of alpha rage. He did not return to the clearing immediately. He tracked the rogue's scent, stale, aggressive, that Gwendolyn had used to cover her own recent passage and the placement of the trap. He found enough evidence, a scuffed heel mark, a discarded scrap of Gwendolyn's ceremonial ribbon near the nightshade patch, to secure the indictment. When Ethan returned, he was walking slowly, deliberately. He was in his human form, but the sheer, contained rage was more terrifying than any snarl. He strode past his silent father, past the terrified elders, and stopped directly before Vivienne and Gwendolyn. "The trial is nullified," Ethan declared, his voice deep and absolute, stripping the air of all resistance. "The rules were corrupted by criminal intent." He pointed a furious finger at Gwendolyn. "You poisoned the path, Gwendolyn. You tried to murder my mate. You are charged with violating sacred pack law, and you will answer to the Alpha for this betrayal." Gwendolyn's composure crumbled. "It was necessary. You abandon us for a rogue. Vivienne, tell him." Vivienne, though pale, retained her composure. "You have no proof, Ethan. This is hysteria. We will not turn on our own without—" "I am your proof," Ethan roared, slamming his fist onto the nearest stone. "I am the Alpha, and the security of this pack rests on justice, not political convenience. Your authority ends here, Mother. I choose my mate. I choose the bond, and I choose justice over your archaic, poisoned hierarchy." The pack recoiled, witnessing the public, irreversible collapse of the alpha female's power. In that moment of political rupture, a small, ragged silver shape crested the farthest, highest point of Widow's Peak, the legendary, fatal, unseen ledge. It was Audrey, battered, limping, but undeniably alive, staring down at the assembled wolves. She hadn't been defeated. She had survived the wilderness, the poison, and the betrayal, and she was home. The cheers were non-existent. The collective mood of the Ironwood Pack was a terrified stillness, fractured by Ethan's furious alpha demand for justice. Every eye was fixed on the high precipice of Widow's Peak, where Audrey, a sliver of silver against the dark rock, began her impossible descent. She did not climb down. She willed herself down. Her human form was a devastating wreck. Her clothes were shredded, her face was gaunt with cold and pain, and one leg dragged uselessly. But beneath the grime and the blood, her internal silver anchoring power was humming with an unstoppable certainty. She was the immovable object, and she was coming home to claim what was hers. When she finally emerged from the tree line and limped into the clearing, the hundreds of wolves assembled saw not the low blood they had rejected, but a living embodiment of the trial of worth itself. She looked like a ghost, a survivor who had fought death and won, and the sheer power of her presence caused dozens of wolves to drop their gaze. She dragged herself directly to the center of the circle, where Vivienne sat dethroned by her son's recent defiance, and where Gwendolyn stood rigid, trapped by the Alpha's accusation. Audrey stopped, planting her good foot firmly on the earth, the silver fire within her anchoring her against the tremors of her collapsing body. She spoke, and her voice was a rough whisper, but in the silence of the clearing, it carried the weight of a decree. "I completed the trial. I reached the summit of the unseen ledge. I survived the fall, the paralysis, and the wilderness." She lifted a trembling hand, pointing a finger at Gwendolyn. "You violated the sacred neutrality of the trial. You did not challenge me. You attempted murder. You poisoned the path with nightshade and orchestrated a criminal trap designed to kill a human female and silence a Luna." Ethan stepped forward, his massive black wolf energy filling the space between them. He knelt, taking Audrey's hand gently. "The evidence is conclusive," he announced to the shocked assembly. "Gwendolyn's scent and tracking remnants are on the site of the nightshade poison and the trap. She violated the rules of this pack and the tenets of the moon goddess. Her actions are treason." He did not look to his mother for confirmation. He looked at Audrey, then back to the terrified Beta and the elders. "Gwendolyn is hereby stripped of all rank and privilege," Ethan declared, his voice a lethal command. "She will be handed over to the border guards for immediate permanent exile. Her bloodline is officially severed from the Ironwood Pack's governance. This is the Alpha's final ruling." Gwendolyn let out a shriek of disbelief and futile fury, instantly dragged away by two grim-faced guards. The Beta, defeated, bowed his head in submission to the Alpha's authority. Vivienne, though her face was a tight mask of cold hatred, finally, slowly, conceded. She met her son's unwavering golden gaze, and she saw the true Alpha, the one who would not bend to her will. She gave a small, barely perceptible nod of acknowledgement to Audrey. The war was lost. With the threat removed and the pack forced into submission, Audrey finally allowed the years of isolation, the weeks of grueling training, and the agony of the poisoned fall to claim her. The silver light around her flickered violently, and she collapsed entirely into the strong, ready arms of her mate. The world was muted, a soft, warm blur. Audrey felt the distinct, pervasive scent of cedar, safety, and alpha power wrapped entirely around her, drowning out the painful memory of nightshade and cold rock. She was aware of the gentle rocking motion as Ethan carried her away from the chaos of the clearing. When she finally managed to open her eyes, she was in his private chambers, tucked beneath heavy furs in a massive carved bed. Ethan sat beside her, his hand resting lightly on her forehead. His golden eyes, now soft brown, stripped of alpha fury, filled with an exhaustion that mirrored her own. The mate bond was no longer frantic. It was a strong, steady river of connection, flowing between them with profound relief. "You're safe now, Luna," Ethan whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Audrey tried to speak, but her throat was too dry. He immediately offered her a drink of water, holding the cup steady until she managed to swallow. "I heard the end," Audrey managed to rasp. "Gwendolyn, did you truly banish her?" "She confessed everything, eventually," Ethan confirmed, a trace of steel returning to his tone. "She tried to destroy the trial, and she tried to destroy you. She failed. Justice has been served. The pack saw what she was, and they saw what you did." He ran his thumb gently across her bruised cheekbone, his touch igniting a low, protective purr in her chest. "You should have died, Audrey. The combined force of the fall, the paralysis, and the right of the unseen ledge. It should have killed you. But you anchored yourself against death itself. The Ironwood Pack witnessed the resilience of your rogue blood. They saw your will." Audrey realized the immense weight of his acceptance. He wasn't just claiming her because of a sacred destiny. He was claiming her because he respected her strength and courage. The bond was now built on something stronger than instinct, mutual, hard-earned reverence. "And your mother?" she asked, the political query an instinct forged in the unforgiving environment of the pack. Ethan leaned in, his gaze intensely serious. "She submitted, publicly. She acknowledged your victory, and she acknowledged my authority. The old ways of bloodlines and political marriages are over. We are the change, Audrey. And that change began when you defied her malice." He paused, searching her eyes. "I was going to propose a loveless marriage for the sake of stability. You walked into my life, shattered my plans, and taught me that a life without love is no stability at all. I don't just claim you as my mate, Audrey. I choose you as my Luna, my partner, my equal." Tears finally tracked down Audrey's face, no longer tears of fear or shame, but of absolute, overwhelming acceptance. She reached out, her hand finding his cheek. "I choose you too, Ethan," she whispered, the words carrying the full, powerful weight of her silver wolf. "For the first time, I am not outside. I am home." Their connection solidified in that moment, not just a binding of bodies or destiny, but a true joining of hearts and wills. The fierce, demanding alpha power merged seamlessly with the deep, anchoring strength of the silver wolf. Their bond settled into an unshakable foundation, ready to withstand any storm. 3 days later, the great hall of the Ironwood Pack was silent once more, but this time, the quiet was one of respectful anticipation, not horrified judgment. The hall had been scoured and purified. The faint memory of shattered glass and Gwendolyn's venomous scent had been replaced by the calming scent of cedar and pine. Audrey stood beside Ethan at the entrance to the hall, her injuries almost entirely healed, testament to the miraculous speed of the mate bond when fully accepted. She wore a simple dress of deep forest green, a gift from a formerly aloof Beta family, and felt the weight of the silver fur pelt resting on her shoulders, a symbol of her unique wolf. She was no longer pale. Her skin was flushed with health, and her eyes held a calm, formidable strength. Ethan reached for her hand, his thumb tracing the faint silver mark that had finally, fully bloomed on her wrist, the visible sign of their completed bond. "Ready, Luna," he murmured, his voice steady. Audrey nodded, feeling the immense, unwavering foundation of his alpha presence supporting her. She was no longer drawing solely on her own strength. Their power was a seamless loop of authority and stability. They stepped into the great hall together. The entire Ironwood Pack was assembled, watching the culmination of the most dramatic, tradition-shattering event in their history. There was no defiance left, only acceptance forged in the heat of a shared life-or-death crisis. Vivienne stood near the dais, her posture still regal, but her eyes held a profound, quiet sobriety. As Audrey passed, she performed a small, reluctant, but undeniable inclination of her head, the first time the former alpha female had ever bowed to a low blood. Ethan and Audrey ascended the dais together. The final part of the mating ceremony was a simple, sacred rite involving the sharing of a bonded cup. When the ritual was complete, Ethan turned to face the hundreds of wolves, his eyes blazing gold, but tempered now with immense, sovereign calm. "The trial of worth is over," Ethan proclaimed, his voice ringing with absolute shared authority. "The old rules of status are broken, and the truth of the moon goddess is revealed. We have found our Luna, forged in fire and anchored by resilience." He didn't speak of love or romance. He spoke of power and purpose. "The Ironwood Pack requires not merely a figurehead, but an unshakable foundation," he continued, placing his hand firmly on Audrey's shoulder. "Where I am the driving force, she is the immovable bedrock. She is the one who withstands the storms of malice and fear, the one who can turn poison into purpose." As he finished speaking, the latent power of Audrey's silver wolf responded. It didn't erupt in a destructive blast. Instead, it solidified around the pair, radiating a visible, powerful aura of pure, protective stability that settled over the entire assembly. Every wolf in the hall felt the calming, absolute certainty of their combined, balanced power. They were secure. They were strong. Audrey, the girl who had once shivered outside the doors, now stood inside, the unchallenged Luna, radiating an immense, unifying heat that promised both safety and change. She met the gaze of the pack, her pack, not with defiance, but with quiet, earned respect. The long, dark night of her isolation was over. The first light of the new Ironwood Pack had dawned.